and ultimately, even in rabbinic tradition, where the soul does have a separate existence from the body in the afterlife, eventually there's resurrection, and that reunites the body and the soul. But even the fact that there's a temporary separation between body and soul is an influence from the Hellenistic world, and that there are echoes of that kind of fear of physicality that exists in the Jewish tradition as well, but not as, I agree with you that it's much stronger in Christianity than the Jews. Yeah.
Well, the Shakers are the ones that take this
To the extreme.
doctrine to the ultimate extreme
Yeah.
by forbidding it completely, and look where they got to.
And we're celebrating the, I guess it's Shaker Heights that we're celebrating.
Right.
Not the Shakers per se, yeah.
Does he offer any, or do we know of any other explanation for this theory? Because it seems like a huge leap to go from idolatry to sexuality. Just, I mean,
I have a thought about that,
Yeah.
that I'll try to articulate. The idea that if we're, if our attention is focused on something other than God, in a sense we're worshiping that. So if we're caught up in lust, in a sense we're worshiping that, and in a sense it's like an idol.
so why didn't he pick money or murder or gluttony? Or, I mean, there are a whole bunch of things.
Yeah.
Why, you know, that, like, I'd like some more evidence for this.
Well,
theory.
that's a reasonable request.
But when God was a woman, you see, you had a more, I think, a feeling of sexuality because you had the mother goddess and you had various other goddesses. And now that you have the monotheism, which is male-oriented, it sort of denigrates the female part of that and therefore the sexual part of that.
So this is a very interesting, there have been lots of conversations in the Jewish feminist world over the last generation about just that issue, and because there's the classic critique of like the neo-pagan world towards the monotheistic world is that, monotheism was completely, did destroy the relationship with the physical and destroyed our connection to the earth, and gave us permission to exploit and take advantage and not see our connection to it. And it's a very heated debate. I actually think Susanna Heschel has written about that particular issue, and a woman who was a teacher of mine, Tikva Freimer-Kensky, Zichronah Livracha, in rabbinical school, she was an Assyriologist by training, and she wrote a number of articles and a whole book in which she tried to defend against. She wrote a book called In the Wake of the Goddesses, where she gave her argument that it wasn't monotheism per se that led to these negative civilizational directions that we've been going. But anyway,
It's a feminine God in monotheism, is that kind of what she was?
Well, she was saying she was trying to argue that that the monotheistic God had both feminine and masculine dimensions. Right. That was a word. Yeah.
Well, there's another aspect to this family, the holiness of the family, the concept of the purity of the family, and a lot of laws are in relationship to the women's purity, the fact that when they are during the menstrual cycle, they're supposed to be separated from the man,
Right.
and then before they can resume their duties in the family, she has to
Intimate relationship.
she has to go to the mikveh and purify herself, which brings the holiness back into the family relationship. And a lot of studies that I read, or treatises that I read, were the fact that the concept of purity of the family is one of the things that made the Jews unique and stick together over the generations. It's like the Shabbat. The purity of the family is something that bound them together throughout the generations.
Well, that's interesting.
Or
Yeah.
it's just a reflection of the male need to know that their offspring are their own.
Well, that's very
And
strong
that's,
in,
you know,
primogeniture.
so that really pushes a lot of rules that get dressed up in other ways.
What
But-
stops a woman after the mikveh to go visit the priest?
Well, there's some, things
Yeah.
become added onto it that make it more difficult, but if you kind of get down to where the kernel is, it
Could
seems
be.
to me there's
I never thought about it this
a
way.
lot of that.
I never thought about it this way.
So, but that is, I mean,
it's the whole thing, that natural lineal descent.
Yeah.
you know, I think, and it would be interesting.
Oh,
I mean,
that's, you know, it was
Yeah,
very
is-
cool.
that's true.
In Judaism, children are related by the mother.
It's a
Because
natural
in
lineal
point of
descent,
fact, you cannot know without DNA testing
Right.
who the father
who the
is.
father is, but if you make it such a gansagadilla, then
Right, and there's a whole, you know, and there's a whole conversation to be had about the whole issue of purity and holiness, you know, in the biblical tradition that the rabbis inherited, and, you know, how bodily emissions affected one's status vis-a-vis the ability to bring sacrifices, for example. And men were also part of that system, like, but in the biblical context, and then it somehow didn't get carried over into the rabbis as much as the, you know, the whole concern with the menstrual cycle, but like seminal emission for men disqualified them until they'd been to the mikveh
Right.
from bringing sacrifices. But in the absence, Donna's looking at me like, what?
I'm just wondering who checked out.
That's a whole different
It was either the mother or the help at home or the wife.
It's an honor system.
So right, that's not. So there's a whole right, and it seems like these are maybe intersecting, you know, overlapping concerns. You know, the concern about holiness and being in a state of ritual purity, and then also, and it may be that these things reinforce each other. Whether they intentionally did or not is an interesting question in terms of that impact and the survival of the Jewish family over a long period of time, which is an interesting theory that I have never considered. So, so I'm just going to check. I don't have a watch. I want to make sure we're on track.
Do you want one?
Oh, thank you. I always borrow your watch.
That's
Susan. Okay. Thank you. Tradition.
Tradition.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. So we're gonna do one little last piece here on Kaplan and sexuality is on the next page on 343. Can we just keep going around? Yeah. Okay. It's Rose. Do you want to? Yeah. It's not surprising.
It's on 343. Oh, where it
It
is
is
not
not?
surprising?
Yeah.
Okay. It's not surprising then that Kaplan did not rely on Freudian psychology, though he characterized Freud as having great intellectual caliber. Kaplan only addressed himself to Freud's attack on religion in The Future of an Illusion, that did not comment on his theories of sexuality. More congenial to Kaplan was the work of psychologist Harry Stack Sullivan, who dealt almost exclusively with interpersonal relations. For all Mordecai Kaplan's work on self-fulfillment and self-dignity, these, he asserted, were best achieved within the context of the group, which made Sullivan's approach the more attractive. In the passage just cited, we see that Kaplan linked sexual exploitation to exploitation in general. He said that the original sin of Adam was the sin which is the source of all sins, and which may well be held responsible for the whole gamut of this sin is the abuse of human freedom by the attempt of men to make their own interests and make their own interests and passions the sole detriments of their behavior. Kaplan was not alone in noting the relationship between sexual and economic exploitation, a point never so clear as in the early years of this century.
So we have to remember this for the trial of Eve next fall. I think this will
This
be
will
Do
be
you have any inkling
This
as
is
to what
going to
the
become
charges?
not a trial of Eve, but it will be a class action lawsuit.
Right.
Do you know what the charge is, by the way? We were all speculating.
No, well, we're not
I think-
telling yet.
We have to, we're working on it.